So I wanted to sit down and record this because as someone who's been going through the job hunting process for the past 5 or so months and counting, the process feels more broken than it's ever been. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that. So here's why I think it's so broken, and a few things that are helping me stay grounded while I'm going through it. So first off, these days, it's obvious that there are more applicants per role than ever before. You go on LinkedIn, within less than an hour of a role going up, you see tens if not hundreds of people having clicked apply to at least view the job description. Now granted, that's not an accurate tracking number for how many people actually went through and finished the process, but even still, there's a lot of people looking. It's more competitive than it's ever been. And unlike previous years, the bar has gone up a lot higher. Even if you have great experience from top tier companies, you come from top tier schools, it's just no longer enough to guarantee any sort of callback. Especially in tech, those top companies go through layoffs and reductions in force as well, not to mention what's happening in the public sector. In terms of just pure numbers, there's more people looking for work than there's ever been in the past few years, and certainly felt in the market. Dynamics between applicants and recruiters and hiring managers are broken as well, because there are just so many people applying for each open role, not to mention this whole cottage industry of AI tools that are being pitched on social media now that help people essentially mass apply to massive numbers of roles. There's anecdotal reports from HR people, from recruiters, from hiring managers online are saying that they're being inundated with applicants, first of all, and on top of that, most of these, the vast majority, are not qualified at all. So they have to in turn focus on being able to get through all of these and weed out all of these useless applications that aren't relevant, as opposed to taking a more human approach and being able to review them on an individual basis. And that's where the prevalence of applicant tracking systems, or ATS, and their respective filters for keywords come into play. In turn, just leads people to look for more and more ways to game that system by way of keyword injection, by using tiny white text to hide keywords on their resume, and all kinds of other tricks to try to essentially focus on gaming the system, as opposed to trying to focus on how they can be the most relevant, best presented applicant for that particular role. And so you have this whole ecosystem of bad incentives on both sides that is just leading to worse results for everybody involved. Once you get past that consideration stage of the funnel, the interview process isn't a whole lot better. For one, I've heard of some processes at certain companies going 6, 7 plus rounds over as many months from applying to filling the role, and that is even with advantages like referrals being part of the equation. Whereas before, it was pretty standard to have the recruiter screen, the hiring manager, maybe around with your peers and cross-functional partners. Now it's up and down the line to multiple peers and multiple cross-functional partners, to the skip level, case presentations and panels, and just on and on and on and on. Companies are becoming more and more risk averse than ever before in terms of how many layers they want to vet people through to ensure that it's going to be a good investment for both sides, to ensure that it's going to work out once they bring that person on board. There's also a widening gap between what shows up to the public on the posting itself and the actual hiring intent. So you may have heard by now of these so-called ghost jobs that are just always kind of listed indefinitely, and you can certainly apply for them, you can even try to be referred to them, but they just never seem to move forward in the process, and they'll still be up 2-3 months after they initially come on. They'll just get reposted on the website, on LinkedIn, etc., over and over again. And companies do this for a number of reasons. They, for one, post a certain number of job openings all the time to indicate growth for tax purposes to the government, for the sake of appearing to be growing for shareholders as a public company. They may be building a backlog of applicants in case that opening ever becomes available. And then there's that old chestnut of use your network, lean on your network, right? This is something that is being told and given advice more now than ever. It's certainly not news to me. I've been told this ever since I started my corporate career over 15 years ago. Honestly, it's one of those things that gets thrown around a lot but doesn't have the necessary caveat that it doesn't work that well unless your network is strong already, unless you've invested time and effort into maintaining those relationships and building those relationships over a longer term well before you already need it. If you're in a position where you're looking actively and you're trying to find a way in to these companies that you want to be at, but you don't have that established already, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to try to build one up out of thin air because you're the one that's in need. There's like a difference in the value exchange equation. For many of us, and myself to an extent included, who weren't able to build that network up, maybe because we changed industries, maybe because we relocated and since lost touch with people due to COVID. Essentially, that whole era put years back in terms of a lot of people being able to stay engaged with their personal relationships. Makes it very difficult to use that advice. Or if for those of us who don't have friends and family here in the US, essentially removes a large part of our interpersonal network from the equation. Even if we open up the definition to just anybody we have a direct connection with. So now that I've set that context, it might be helpful to talk about a few things that's helping me cope.
You gotta pick and choose the advice that you should tune into and block out the rest of the noise. You're gonna hear all kinds of advice come at you on this topic, whether it's from YouTube or Reddit or word of mouth or some article. Know what's applicable to your situation. Be aware that those things are oftentimes crafted for a much broader general audience. Leave behind what doesn't make sense for your particular situation. For me personally, what I've had a degree of success with is I've been following up with hiring managers via LinkedIn. You can generally find who is the lead on a given team by looking up the company's page and under the People's tab on LinkedIn. The more higher up in the seniority you go, the more likely it is that they're going to have some of a presence, and the more likely it is that they're going to be actually active and be able to see your incoming messages. The higher risk version of this is that you actually deduce what their work email is and you use that as your point of contact. Some hiring managers, be warned, will not like this. They may find it very intrusive. It kind of depends on just what you're comfortable with. If you're in B2B sales, for example, that may be well within your comfort zone because that is what you'll be doing all the time. There are any of a number of tools out there where you can look up this information for pretty much any company. If you don't want to run the risk, then just go the LinkedIn route. If you want to ensure that they look at it, especially if they don't seem to be particularly active on LinkedIn, you can try the email route that I described. Similar quick note, flagging your interest and explain very briefly, almost like a short elevator pitch or a very short cover letter of what you bring to the table and why you're a good fit for the position. I've found in the past 2 or 3 weeks or so, this gets a little bit of a traction going and at least helps ensure that a human looks at my application, and at worst, I'll get a rejection faster versus waiting 2-3 weeks, a month out and just potentially never hear back. That is one of the more kind of near-term things that you can do if you don't have the strong network necessary to lean on.
Redefining success outside of the outcomes of the job offer is important. This is one of those things where you have to show up day to day and put in effort, and you can do everything within your reach, everything within your capability, but it's still not going to oftentimes result in the outcome you want. I had direct experience with this at one particular company for a role that was pretty solid. The conversation was very good. Going from April into May, I had a good conversation with the hiring manager, decent conversations with the team and cross-functional partners, and ultimately it just didn't work out. And oftentimes for legal reasons, most companies will be pretty reluctant to offer you specific feedback even if you reach those later stages. So in the meantime, you do have to get invested into that role, that potential possibility to a certain extent, to be able to put yourself in the shoes of that role, to be able to present yourself as being able to be a great hire, to be a great fit for that particular need. When it doesn't work out, it feels like a bit of a breakup, honestly, and it can be quite abrupt, going from these very warm, cordial exchanges to all of a sudden just like, we're not moving forward, we're going with somebody with a better fit, whatever it may be, and that's it. And you're gonna have to reconcile with that, whether you like it or not. And for me, I found my emotional recovery timeline was like a pretty solid week and a half before I got enough confidence and self-belief back to start going out and actively applying again. What I'm saying is you have to, yes, invest to the extent that you can present yourself as a fit for the role, but also make sure you're detached enough to be emotionally healthy in case it doesn't work out, because there's always a chance of that, no matter how well you think you did each step of the process. The job search is a full-time job in and of itself, right? That's why for a lot of people, myself included, it was quite difficult to carve out the necessary time and focus needed when still employed to devote a meaningful amount of time and effort to this. But at the same time, you have to load balance it as a part-time rhythm with the rest of life, and not the end-all be-all of your day. If the search is all that you have going on, it can be quite unhealthy because you are not fully in control of the outcome, just the amount of effort that you put in. And so it's important to make sure you have other things going on in your days and weeks, whether it's keeping in touch with friends and family, spending time with loved ones, spending time with your pet even, going out for a walk, touch grass. Just make sure you have other things going on. Otherwise, you're not going to show up in your most optimal state as a candidate, and that in turn is going to affect your results. And then there's creating content like I'm doing now. I'm definitely not as far along as some other folks, and as far as a creative endeavor goes, I wouldn't put it on the same level as producing music or creating art or anything like that, but just having some sort of an outlet where you're literally, the bar is so low, where you're just making something as opposed to being the consumer all day, all the time. It takes a little bit of that agency back to where you feel like there's a little bit of purpose to your day, that you're making something, you're getting these thoughts out of your head, you're putting something back out into the world that you have control over. And that can feel valuable in and of itself. Whether it's YouTube or short form, IG, TikTok, whatever it may be. Even if it's not getting any views, even if nobody cares but your grandma, this builds a little bit of positive momentum for you internally, in that you're doing something that of your own choosing. Even if you're not getting any leads yet, in terms of the outreach and the applications and the networking requests you're putting out. And speaking of having other things going on in life, keeping up a fitness routine is really important. I talked in another video about how I generally try to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday for gym mostly, and then setting aside Tuesday and Thursday to strictly apply and take interviews. Having that sort of structure just gives my days some sort of guidance now that I don't have a 9 to 5 and meetings holding that down. And at least maintaining your fitness, even if you're not necessarily progressing in the same way that you used to towards your goals, because you have this other piece of uncertainty in your life, at least maintains that mental and physical foundation for you to be able to show up and present yourself in an optimal way. Maintaining connections will be important too. I'm sure it's not a huge reach for you to know other people in your network who are going through a similar transition. To the extent that you can keep in touch with folks and mutually support each other and offer that little bit of hope and progress and sharing your respective experiences, that will do a lot to kind of ground them in reality, as opposed to spending all of the time looking at online forums like Reddit or LinkedIn that can paint a pretty distorted picture of the pessimism and the dire numbers that are out there right now. I think the main thing has just been to let go of the idea that I can optimize my way out of this completely. As someone who is a project or program manager by trade, a lot of my approach to things is, how can I make this process more efficient? How can I make it optimal? How can I design a system that makes sense and it works for me? And at the end of the day, this is one of those things that, yeah, I can design and optimize to a certain degree, but ultimately there's so much variability and unknowns involved in terms of what's going on the other side at the hiring company, in terms of just the sheer luck that's involved in the process that I or anybody else going through a similar transition doesn't have full control. And that is something that I'm still learning to let go of, while still maintaining a sense of efficacy in showing up day to day and putting effort into this as if it was a real job on its own. But by no means am I saying that I've solved this completely. This is just me sharing kind of my own personal experiences. I've gone from hope to despair to hope and despair and back again over the last 5 months as I navigate the ups and downs of this process. There's really not much to say in terms of advice on that front, other than to keep going and to show up one day at a time and put in the effort that you can, but also maintain a realistic perspective that it may not work out each step of the way, and be prepared for that. If you're going through this too, you're not imagining it. The game really has changed, but there are ways to stay sane while navigating it. So if this has helped you at all, or if you want me to share more about my process, drop a comment below.
These are the times that forces us to figure out who we truly are.